everyone, hope you're doing well. I thought we would have a look at rank 3 Sweden after having a look at rank 1 and 2 on the channel. Recently I've been basically streaming War Thunder on Twitch, and you can find a link in the description below, and pretty much been playing through the Swedish tree. After spading out rank 1, 2, 3 and the majority of 4, I can say that my experience is definitely getting better and better as I'm going through the tree. Rank 1 and rank 2 definitely had a lot of issues. The only really redeeming factor was this 3-0 lineup, and then once we get to rank 3 there was a lot of surprising and happy experiences which I'm really glad to share. So the first one is the PVKV2, this machine right here. Now this is a 3.3 machine which has more penetration than the majority of machines that you will find even at 5.3 or 5.7. This machine actually gets access to a stock shell which gives you 146mm of pen, obviously at best glance, and then a rank 4 shell APC-BC with a HE filler which has 162, 130 and 55mm worth of pen respectively. This is a wonderful round with a wonderful machine. It has decent muzzle velocity, 940. This machine has decent optics, it has a lot going for it, and it's at 3.3. It actually has more penetration all the way up to 5.3, apart from the APDS round that you find on the PVKV-M43 and even 5.7 on the SDR-V74. So this thing has more pen than the Delat Torn, which is at 5.0, and also the PVKV-M43 at 4.3, which is just weird to think about. Just because of the fact that it's a 3.3 vehicle. The rank 3 modification, the rank 3 vehicles for Sweden, I think have the weirdest BRs in game if we compare it to a bunch of the other vehicles that we see in the game, but I think at least personally it does make them a lot more fun. The first vehicle in, the Swedish tree that does have any pen though, this PVKV2, is fun because of that, and really because of that and a bunch of other factors around the gun. This machine doesn't have a lot of armor. The most it has is 50mm on the front. The survivability is pretty nice because of the fact that it has 5 crew members, so if you get shot in the turret, which should be the only part you're exposing the majority of the time, you actually will survive. On top of it as well, with the 75mm, you have crazy gun depression, -14, so you can get into a lot of situations where you pretty much can use the terrain to your advantage, and this is a trend that we see with a lot of these Swedish vehicles, which was a trend in the lower ones, with -15 gun depression, -10 across the board, -14, and it's the same with these, so -15 on the PVKV-M43, but with the PVKV2, you have the ability to use this long-barreled 75mm incredibly effectively to be able to deal with targets. So another thing as well, which isn't really looked at too much in War Thunder, is camera positioning. So one of the big things that makes vehicles much more easier to use or much more harder to use is where your binos are. So this vehicle, the binos that you can find are on top of the vehicle by quite a decent amount. So they're actually pretty much on this bar here, and that means that you can have full looking above if you're sat behind a hill, you have full view of whatever's behind the other side of the hill, and you're able to deal with it however you seem fit. So you can always set up scenarios at 3.3 where you get the first shot off because you're able to see the enemy way before they can see you. And that's all because of the binocular and the camera positioning of the PVKV2. The camera positioning is way far back on this machine, and you can see you have a ton of view above it, and with the binos you can just set up shots really, really well. We talked about the optics being great before. You can see right here, the optics are really nice on this machine, and also the rounds are just incredibly good as well. Having that HE filler on the AP round is just such a nice change. The gun itself overall is just a really nice change from what we've seen before. What we've seen before is a lot of low penetrating rounds from the 37s and the 75s, which don't really do a lot of damage, if we're quite honest, and then even high penetrating rounds which which struggle with damage as well. And with the 75s, pretty much just low penetration. The SDRV M42, even though I enjoyed my time in it, I can see its issues with only 85mm worth of pen. Then the only other vehicle where we actually had penetration, the M43, has 240 of it, but the heat is kind of pedantic, it doesn't always work as well as you want it to, as many Italian players will attest to when it comes to using heat on the Semaventes or on something like the P40 Leoncello. So the PVK-V2 for me is the first vehicle in this line where I felt comfortable that if I see a target, I can easily pen it and I can easily deal with it, which is just really nice. And it kind of surprises me, this vehicle is at 3.3. Since it has more penetration than a lot of 5.3s and 5.7s in the game, I can definitely see this vehicle going up because it's got good maneuverability, good survivability because of the 5-man crew, and also because it's very hard to actually set off this vehicle when it comes to its ammunition. Always don't take as much ammunition as there is. The only real issue, though, the two issues this has is it's open topped, but all of the machines that you find at Swedish rank 3 are either open topped or only have 9mm worth of armor or have an open back, such as the Delat Torn. And if you have a look at the PVK-43, it has an open top. So all of the Swedish vehicles suffer from this, and also the reload's pretty long. 12.5 seconds is quite a long reload, but because of the fact that you one-shot the majority of machines that you shoot at, that isn't too much of an issue. As long as you're not being teamed up on by 2 or 3 or 4 people, you should be fine, and this should attest to it. I have a 3-to-1 KD in it, and the way I see myself is I am not a good tanker. I'm a below average tanker and an above average pilot. So when I have stats of a 3-to-1 in a vehicle, and this is mainly using it, by the way, at 5.0 with the Delat Torn, trying to get that thing spaded. So we're using it nearly, 2 whole BR brackets above where it should be using, and facing a lot of 5.3s, a lot of 5.7s in the form of Tigers and T-3485s, and just eating them. Which is why I don't think this thing stays at 3.3. I think this is going to be one of the first vehicles which is going to go up in BR compared to the Swedish stuff. I think this goes up to 4.3, maybe even 4.0. It's an incredibly powerful vehicle. I highly recommend it. The next vehicle in the... Oh, and also, if you want to run this as like a main vehicle, which you definitely can do with the SAV, the LV, DGB and the STRV M42, you also at 3.3 have access to 2 really fun planes, the J21A2 and also the A21A3. The A21A3 is the one you want to go for, just because it has access to bombs and rockets, but the J21A2 is also a really, really entertaining plane. All of the vehicles like that for Sweden are really fun. You can see 21 and 3, 25 and 8, 20 and 12, and this is the one I've been using in ground forces. 17 and 5 in this one, 12 and 5. They're very, very good machines, and being able to run 2.33s with access to bombs and rockets is a little thing which certain other BRs for Sweden aren't really able to do. The next vehicle is the Delat Torn. Now, the Delat Torn's a weird one. This is technically a medium tank, so what it gets over some of its, compatriots is artillery, which is really nice. I still don't understand why tank destroyers don't get artillery, but they just don't. So for some reason, the Delat Torn, being a medium, is able to get it. So that's nice for it, but I would rather these 2 vehicles also got artillery. I've never understood the reasoning behind tank destroyers not getting it. The Delat Torn has an auto-loaded 75mm. It's sat on the same chassis as the Largo, and it has the 410 horsepower engine, which you also find on the Largo. We're sat... Oh no, sorry, not the Largo. The STRV M42EH, this one, right here. Yeah, so it has exactly the same powertrain and engine as the STRV M42. So if you played that, you know how this feels. It also has exactly the same chassis. So we're once again going up 2 whole BRs for the same chassis for a vehicle, which doesn't really matter too much as long as the other areas of it are mostly different, and the Delat Torn is mostly different when it comes to its general play. So it has a 4-man crew, three people in the turret and 1 in the hull. This means that if the turret gets popped, it dies. The difference between something like this survivability and the PVKVs, even though the PVKV has way less armor, it's impossible. Well, it's not impossible, but it's very hard to one-shot this machine, especially if you're only exposing the turret to shoot, right? Whereas with the Delat Torn, all you've got to do is pen the turret, and it's really easy to kill these 3 guys inside: the loader, the gunner, and also the commander looking backwards. So for me, it's just a scenario where, because you're missing that 5th crew member, the person down here, you cannot soak a shot in this. And if you do soak a shot, it's pretty much because somebody has shot center mass, don't know where to shoot you, and end up like hitting the cannon breech. If you want to know where to shoot a Delat Torn, just shoot it right here in the left hand side, kill the commander and gunner, probably injure the breech as well, and then finish it off with a shot to the other side. So what is special about this machine? Well, it's got technically an autoloader. I would actually see it more as an assisted loader. The reason for that is because it only has 4 pieces of ammunition in this autoloader, which has a reload rate of 3.6 seconds. Once you get past that, it starts loading the vehicle. Like, I'll show you. The reason why I don't see it as a proper autoloader is when your magazine, let's call it magazine, runs out, so your shot. So we have 1, and then we have 2, there we go, and then let's do the 3rd, then the 4th, and then the 5th, right? So that should be all of the rounds out, and you can see it is. So it takes longer to reload, but it's still reloading, right? So it's not your general autoloader. It just means that after you've expanded your first stage ammo rack, which is the autoloader area in the back on the side, or the assisted loader if you want to say that, it just takes a little bit longer to reload. So it's still got a decent reload even after you know, getting rid of that, you know, first stage ammo stowage. But with that first stage ammo stowage, it sits at 3.6 seconds reload rate, which is incredibly good. But one of the weird things about it, if you have a look at the Delat Torn, is if you go to its tank loader, its weapon reloading can get down to 3 seconds. So you can really pump out some shots with this. Now, there is a downside to the Delat Torn, though. So even though you have this really cool reload, you've still got -10 gun depression, so that for me is the standard for good in-game. You know, you're still lacking armor. Like, this thing has no armor. It has a little bit more than other Swedish vehicles, but still 60mm of 5.0 is just not good enough. But one of the things is, with the autoloader in combination with this round, which is 139, 120, 53, sometimes you can be in situations where you can't get enough damage off because you have not exactly the best pen. This, when you face a lot of stuff like Panthers, when you face a lot of stuff such as IS-2s, you have to be very precise on where you shoot the damn things. And what is and the 2 issues that the Delat Torn has is it actually has way lower penetration than the PVKV. It has 30mm less penetration than it with its AP shell, and even with its upgraded 75 shell, it only gives you a little bit more penetration, but at least, you know, you should take that shell. But it only gives you, it still has 20 less penetration than a vehicle that is 3.3, which is just weird, right? Like, it's very odd how far apart these vehicles are because of the fact that this one has an autoloader, even though it does everything else worse than the PVK2. Well, I shouldn't say autoloader, I should say it has a quick reload for its first stage ammo stowage, because it doesn't have an autoloader technically. So, anyway, with the Delat Torn, as I was talking about, it also has a fully functioning turret. It can go 360 degrees, which is nice, but it only has a turret rotation speed of 11.9 degrees per second. So we're still stuck in that area with Sweden, where they don't have great turret traverse. Like you can see with a lot of these vehicles, the turret traverse is really not great, but at least it's a full turret, so you can just swing the chassis and it ain't too bad. As I've talked about many times, the Swedish vehicles are nice because they have base power, which is pretty high, so therefore you can actually use the chassis really well to be able to, you know, move around the place. The fact that the back's exposed pretty much means if someone gets behind you, you just die, but that happens in most vehicles anyway. My main issue is the fact that if you just pen the turret on this thing, it's pretty much dead. The only redeeming factor is the low reload. There is no reason to take this over this, apart from the reload. So there are certain circumstances where the Delat Torn is actually useful. Like if I have a look at my stats, you can see that like, and I've only played these to spade them, right? So the PVKV2 3-to-1, which has mainly been played at 5.0, by the way, and then the Delat Torn is 37 and 30. The reason why this is like this is because of the fact that the optics on the Delat Torn, they are 1.8 to 3.5, whereas something like the PVKV, if it will actually show, is 8 to 16. So this means you can effectively snipe with the PVKV really, really well. This has Leopard 1 optics, which is just really nice. But the Delat Torn can't. The Delat Torn, most of the time you have to do some form of ranging shot, or you have to do some form of shot to try and get your bearings, and then fire the next shot. And sometimes, because of the fact that you run into targets like IS-2s, like a lot of jumbos, which is one of the main issues you run into, like a lot of stuff like that, you can't just, you know, be able to just keep shooting them without having to effectively aim. And with the PVKV2, you can at its BR. Like, one of the main things you run into at 5.0 is jumbos. And one of the issues that I've personally had going through the Swedish tech tree is the fact that if you have a look at the general like power level of America, it's incredibly strong at pretty much every BR that you go up. So you can see with the Delat Torn, right, you can't really pen anything on the jumbo. You can't pen any of its upper glacis. You can obviously pen the normal areas like the machine gun port and also the cupola, and you can do pretty good damage with the upgraded round, which has a little bit more pen than the other one. But if you go to the PVKV with the upgraded round once again, you actually have chances to be able to penetrate some of this. It's not very great chances, but it's a little bit better than what you would deal with before, and also the round does more damage when it penetrates. So it just means that if you're using this, you know, you can maneuver a little bit better. You can maybe get a road wheel shot, try and hit that ammunition, try and you know, kill out the crew. But the fact is, you have a 3.3 vehicle which has as much chance at killing the meta vehicle at 5.0 as the 5.0 vehicle has in the form of the Delat Torn. The Delat Torn is really good when you're getting pushed by multiple enemies. So this, the one thing that the PVKV2 is not good at when you're getting pushed by multiple enemies, the Delat Torn is really good at. So you're able to deal with them over and over and over again as they push you, annihilate them, and just keep going. But everything else, I would actually put the PVKV2 in front of it as, because you're both going to get annihilated by the same things. You're both going to get annihilated by planes. You're both going to get annihilated if you get hit. But the PVKV just has better optics. It has a better round. It has a better gun. It has more gun depression, and the chassis really doesn't matter. They both have decent speed behind them. So it is incredible to me to see the 3.3 PVKV be at 3.3 when the Delat Torn is at 5.0. Because in the majority of scenarios, I would take the 3.3 over it, which is why I've had so much success in it. Now, the middling vehicle is this one, the PVKV M43 1946, and this is an open-top tank destroyer, once again on the same chassis as the Largo, but it does have the 410 horsepower engine of the upgraded STRV M42. And I've got to say, it's really nice, once again, having a vehicle with quite a low mass of 23 tons with a lot of horsepower, being able to get to positions nicely and being able to set up a lot of like camp spots with this vehicle. This thing also has the optics of the PVK-V2, so not the Delat Torn. It has the 16 times, and it has the 75mm PV-Can M43. This pen's up to 149, and I believe it's the same gun that you have on the Delat Torn. So you have the same gun on the Delat Torn at 4.3 with just a slightly longer reload. Obviously this is better because it means that on this, you know, you're able to one-shot stuff a hell of a lot easier at this BR compared to stuff like Jumbos and Tigers and all of that, and Panthers and stuff like that. One of the interesting things about this PVKV is the fact that they actually hold shells on top of the breech. Now these aren't actually in your first stage ammo storage, so you might not see it a lot, but it's just kind of interesting how two shells just kind of chill there on top of the breech. I've never really seen that before with any other vehicle, and it's just kind of interesting. It's also got a machine gun, which is nice, you know, to point out enemies and things like that. But once again, the main thing that is lovely about this vehicle is the fact that the camera position is really nice. And this is something, as I said, that isn't talked about that much, but is very, very, very much, you know, important. So you can see the gun depression is great on it. And what this means is you can take a defensive position around a point, you can pop your binos, which are incredibly high compared to a lot of other vehicles, you can line up shots and then, you know, get to a position to be able to shoot because you've got a good engine backing up your chassis. And then you're able to, you know, push around and be able to do whatever you really feel like with it. So even though this is a tank destroyer, even though, you know, generally tank destroyers have inherent issues when they don't have a turret, you know, they can't get the gun online all the time, you can get outflanked and stuff. I would actually say the PVK VM43 is in my higher echelons of decent tank destroyers without a turret, just because of the fact that it has a good penning round. It also doesn't have too much of a bad stock thing because of this AP round. That can be said about all these vehicles, which is nice, especially after the horrors of the 37mm from these ranks. Having rounds which just actually pen is really nice. I can't stress that enough. And also the gun depression being good and the reload rate being satisfactory for this vehicle. One thing I do have to mention though, which is something that's an on-running theme over these three vehicles, they're all inherently defensive. These machines do so much better on the defensive than they do on the offensive, and the reason for that is because their guns aren't exactly as stable as you want them to be, and also because you have high penning, high damage rounds which you want people to push into you so you can use on them. So if we're talking about going forward, if we're talking about being aggressive, Sweden is not really going to do that at rank 3. It's just going to hold points and it's going to play the map properly, and it's going to do well doing that, you know. But if you come up against, like, let's say a coordinated set of 2 or 3 people, then you're going to have issues, because once you kill one, you know, the next one's going to blap you, and all hell's going to break loose because you've lost your defensive position. It's also kind of hard to one-shot this machine. Once again, that you can do it because of this bar on the top. What is really annoying is, for some reason, if you get shot, because generally you're sat like this, right? Because you're sat behind something, you're using your gun depression really well, you're trying to make sure to hit targets, you can actually hit this, and I don't know whether it will show it on protection analysis, but you can actually hit, you can hit like here, and what happens is it goes up and then bounces down off that bar and will kill everything inside. So you can do that. I think that's not the best. But you can see how the round just randomly explodes in the center. It's as if this thing is modeled with a roof, but the roof isn't there. Like, I don't know why this thing is exploding here. So even in this, like, defensive posture, you can sit like this. The round can go in the top, it can bounce off the top bar, and it can blow up your machine. So if you're struggling against one of these and you don't know where to kill it, just shoot it in the center, and that'll happen. and it's incredibly infuriating sometimes when you die like that, but it's also, you know, it's going to happen. You're going to get killed somehow in a weird and wonderful way in most machines, and that's how you do it in this machine. So yeah. Overall, very happy with this tank destroyer. Still has inherent issues of a tank destroyer without a turret, but lovely. Much better than the other tank destroyers that we've seen. An actual competitive vehicle. The last vehicle is the worst out of the four, and this is the L62 Anti-2. So this is a AA vehicle, which is not good at being an AA vehicle. It's open top, which is fine. You know, you see that with a lot of AA vehicles, but the problem is you have 3 people in the turrets and 1 people down here. This means that in one pass you will normally die from the majority of vehicles that you face, because they'll just machine gun your turret, kill the 3 people, and you won't be able to survive. Then it's got this really small turret ring, which I don't really understand. It's absolutely tidgy, and it has this huge 40mm in it. Now, I thought maybe with this 40mm, maybe it's the L70, or maybe it's a similar Bofors, so you'd be able to, you know, whap at people. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Instead, what we have is a low-firing 40mm, which generally isn't very good against aircraft. If you've ever used machines such as the wonderful, you know, Crusader AA Mark 1, you will understand that this low-firing 40 is not good for AA. Also, it's really weird when it comes to AA for Sweden, because the default belt actually has more pen than the AP belt. So I'm wondering if this is actually a way of making it so we don't have like crazy high penning AA running around the place. Like, they could have easily made this an APC belt with a Heffy on the end, so 3 APCs and a Heffy, but instead they decided to use the semi-armor-piercing high-explosive incendiary, which is kind of nice, and it does knock down your penetration by a significant margin. The difference between this belt and the default belt is the default belt can pen T-34 turrets, whereas this one is going to struggle or can't. So it's always better if you are looking at that multi-role capability for a machine like this to take the default belt over the other two. Turret rotation is incredibly slow in this. Gun elevation is also pretty slow in this. It's not a good AA. It's another one of those vehicles that is masquerading as AAs, but is actually a little tank destroyer. So pretty much at this rank, we have a tank destroyer, a tank destroyer, a tank destroyer, and a tank destroyer. And the Anti-2 is really, you know, not that good. It's the vehicle that took for me the longest to spade, just because I couldn't shoot anything down in it, and also when it came to dealing with ground vehicles, it was too slow to be able to get around the side of them. So I actually ended up just capping points with it, or trying to, like staying around points, waiting for people to walk past and then trying to kill them after spading, you know, these 3 vehicles here. So overall, it's not a good AA, but at least sometimes you can use it in that multi-role area where you can go after stuff. So for me, I enjoy my rank 3 a lot more than rank 1 and rank 2. I'm still very confused by the BRs of these vehicles. Like when we have a look at the Delat Torn to the M43, why are these two so different when it comes to its BR? And also, why is the PVKV so low? Why is this 3.3? This machine should be a hell of a lot higher than it is. This should be at least 4.3, 4.7 if we compare it to the PVKV M43, which is 4.3 right now. So they've got pretty much the same gun depression. The PVKV2 has gun depression. It has more survivability because it has 5 crew. They both get killed from the air really easily. This has more penetration and more damage on its rounds, and also the only issue that it has is that it has a longer reload than the PVKV, and they have the same optics. So it's just really odd to me why these two are the same BR. Why this is 1 OBR lower than the PVKV M43. I would advocate for the PVKV to go up to 4.3 and probably put the Delat Torn to 4.7, just so it doesn't always face, 5.3s, 5.7s all the time. Instead, it would be nice to see its defensive nature come through a lot more and people to enjoy the experience. It would also give you a solid 4.3 lineup, which you can then run with the J26, which is, of course, the Mustang for the Swedes. And there's actually... after using the J26, I'm kind of disappointed in it. So I really enjoy Mustangs a lot. I really do. You can see here, I'm 41-43 in it. That's because I've been using it in Ground Realistic, and 23 player kills. So technically, this is 64-43, right? And I've been using this a lot, and it has two things which are different compared to other Mustangs. First of all, its bomb loadout is pathetic. It only gets two 59 kilo bombs, which have 26 kilos worth of explosive, so not really worth your time, but if you're really precise with them, it can work. And also, you know that belt, which is really strong for every other 50 cal, when it comes to this like late war, 12.7 50 cal, the M2? Well, for some reason, Sweden doesn't have it. Instead of having the API-T belt, they have just a TTT belt with just tracers in it. I don't know why this is. I don't know whether this is a bug or whether this is supposed to be like this, but it means that you do have to change what belt you're using from, the other Mustangs to the J26. I would recommend stealth or ground targets, depending on what you want to do, but yeah, it's just very sad that that's the case. You don't get to see the pew-pew lasers at all. But yeah, you can run it with the T18B2 with all of these vehicles below. They do work really well in a lineup, even though they're all dodgy BRs. All of them can be up to 5.0 and be completely fine, which is why I think the BRs are all over the place for rank 3. So yeah, overall positive experience. Had a very good time, and next time we'll be having a look at rank 4, which once again is mainly positive experiences with, let's just say, a few dodgy ones. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I just want to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Chris Giltnane, Daniel Stanton, Jay Wilt, John Ryman, Martinez, Super Cacti, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, and also Elove Goat and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.